Hello and a warm welcome to Federal's special program, Capital Beat. Now, Supreme Court has agreed to hear a batch of petitions challenging the constitutionality of the Chief Election Commissioner and Other Election Commissioners Act 2023. Now, the law, which was enacted earlier this year, removed the Chief Justice of India from the selection panel for appointing election commissioners, and the hearing now is scheduled for February the 4th. Now, the pleas were mentioned before a bench comprising Justice Surikant, Dipankar Datta, and Ujjwal Bhuya by Advocate Prashant Bhushan, who said that this plea should be heard before Rajiv Kumar, who is the Chief Election Commissioner. He retires on 18th of February. Now, what has the court really said in quintessence? The court really has said that the real test here is between the court's opinion and the exercise of legislative powers. So, what is the possibility of the Supreme Court striking down the act where the Chief Justice of India was completely excluded? Or is there a middle ground which the court could take? And what can one really expect from the Supreme Court's hearing on 4th and between 4th and 18th of February, when Rajiv Kumar retires? Very little time is there. So can Supreme Court really address the real issue here? Joining me now is renowned transparency activist Anjali Bharadwaj. Thank you so much, Anjali, for joining. And the very fact that Supreme Court has agreed to hear the petition now on 4th of February, but will the time be enough to address the issue? And what is that one bit you are looking at from the Supreme Court hearing, which will come up on 4th?
Neelu, the Election Commission of India under the Constitution is mandated to make sure that elections happen in our country in a free and fair manner. So the basic requirement is that the Election Commission functions in an unbiased manner. The election commissioners are independent of any political party which is in the fray and are able to conduct elections, get them conducted in a proper manner, which is not biased in any way. Now, for the election commissioners to be people who are unbiased and also are seen to be unbiased, it's very important that they are not selected by any political party, any one political party. In the Constitution, it was very clearly stated that a law should be made to be able to figure out what the selection committee will be for the election commissioner's appointment and the chief election commissioner's appointment. Till the law was made, the Constitution said that the executive can appoint the election commissioners. Now, unfortunately, since the Constitution was adopted by people, this law has not got made. And therefore, it was basically the executive that was making these appointments. Now, by and large in India, there was a feeling that elections were happening in a free and fair manner, and there was a feeling that the election commissioners were not biased, and the election commission was an independent autonomous body which was really performing the role of a watchdog. But what happened in the recent past, and especially in the 2019 elections and again in 2024, is that there has been a large number of questions that have come up on the functioning of the election commission and how the election commissioners are behaving. So there was a matter that was agitated in the Supreme Court where the issue of the law being required was brought up also, and the Supreme Court basically, in a sense, said that the executive, which is basically the ruling party, should not appoint the election commissioners, and that the selection committee, which selects the election commissioners, should be unbiased. The Supreme Court said that till a law is made, they set up a committee, which was the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition, and the Chief Justice of India. So these three people who are able to come up with names who are independent for the election commissioners. Now, as soon as that was done, the central government quickly brought a bill and got it enacted, got it passed in Parliament, which basically says that the selection committee now will be the Prime Minister, the leader of opposition, but the third person, instead of being the Chief Justice of India, the law says will be one of the union ministers. Now, basically, what we are seeing is that there is a violation of the judgment of the Supreme Court, both in letter and spirit. Because the Supreme Court was basically saying that the selection committee should be should not have a preponderance of the ruling party, of the executive. But that's exactly what has been done by bringing this law. So the law now has 3 votes. 2 votes are with the ruling party, because the prime minister and the union minister is there, and 1 is the leader of opposition, which basically means that effectively the ruling party is going to decide who the election commissioner is. And we are again going to have a situation where there will be big questions on whether the election commissioner who's being appointed is a person who's pliant to the ruling party and therefore is likely to be biased. Now, this is a huge problem. It's a great danger to any electoral democracy to have the referee, essentially the watchdog, the regulator, which is the election commission, to be not independent and to be staffed with people who are seen to be pliant and therefore not able to play the role that they are supposed to.
But Anjali, the observation of the court towards the end of the hearing, where they said that the real test here is between the court's opinion and the exercise of legislative powers. Now, the court has already given its opinion as far as the Anjali Bharadwaj case is concerned, and very categorically, Supreme Court had said what it had to about the independence of the election commission. So, what can be the possibility when the case comes up on 4th of February? Will they really strike down? Will the court find a middle ground? Will they really take on the executive? That is the big question.
Well, the hearing, when it happens, of course, we will know then how it transpires, what happens. But it's very clear that the Constitution bench in the Anjali Bharadwaj case had very, very extensive hearings. There were very extensive discussions that took place. And basically, what the Supreme Court upheld was the need to have an autonomous election commission, which is what is required under the Constitution. So it's not just a matter, Neelu, of judicial opinion. We are actually talking about the judiciary interpreting the Constitution and saying that, of course, the election commission, given the nature of the job that it is supposed to do, must be independent, and therefore the election commissioners must be independent, and they cannot be appointed by any one political party. With the selection committee, which has a majority of the political party. So we expect that the Supreme Court, when it hears this, yes, of course, the Constitution provided for a law to be made finally, and therefore the Parliament had the power to make this law. So nobody is questioning that. The Supreme Court itself did not say. It's really worth remembering that the Supreme Court was basically saying that the selection committee cannot be having a preponderance of the executive. It just put in the Chief Justice, the Prime Minister, and the Leader of Opposition, that selection committee, as an interim measure. So the court itself is seized of the matter and, and of course, agreeing with the fact that there needs to be a law. So there is no question of that. The problem is that the law which has been put in place has basically gone against the letter and spirit of the Supreme Court judgment. And I think, therefore, that when there is a hearing that happens, there is no reason why the Supreme Court will uphold a law like this, which is essentially going against the Constitution itself, what is mandated in the Constitution, which is an independent election commission.
So, if you remember Rajiv Kumar's last press conference where he announced the dates for the Delhi elections, he very categorically said that, there's no problem with the voter turnout data. Then he said that there are no deletions which are happening from the voters list, and several other things he pointed out. Then he also pointed out that, why the rules were changed at the last moment, and he cited the breach of privacy of the voters. What would you really say? And he also lauded the Supreme Court and the High Court for the kind of support he got. So do you think that the Supreme Court really will take on the executive and will get into a domain where it thinks that, election commission is a constitutional authority, and therefore let's not cross that boundary? Do you think Supreme Court would do that, or the only option left with the Supreme Court is that to get back its prestige, because once they've already given an order in Anu Barnwal case, so they will do nothing except to strike down the amendment?
Well, this is not about a boundary that the Supreme Court has to cross. The Supreme Court in a democracy is meant to uphold the Constitution and constitutional principles and values and rights of citizens. So in this particular case, the law essentially goes against, like I said, what is provided for in the Constitution and what the Supreme Court judgment clearly spelled out in the Anup Baranwal case. So it's not I don't think that it's really about the judiciary being worried at all about the executive thinking that there will be a line that will be crossed, or the parliament thinking that way. It's really about saying that we have to uphold the Constitution. Now, as far as your point about what the Chief Election Commissioner recently said in the press conference that he held, look, Nilu, there have been several questions about the functioning of the Election Commission in the recent years. The 2019 elections, for example, saw how blatantly there was inaction by the Election Commission against the ruling party candidates who were giving hate speeches, who were indulging in other kinds of wrongdoings. So when complaints were filed to the Election Commission, it was taking very selective action. Action was taken immediately against the opposition party leaders, but no action seemed to be taken against the ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party. Now, this raised a lot of questions, and it wasn't just the civil society or citizens who were saying it. The ex-election commissioner, Ashok Lavasa, resigned on the point that his dissent notes were not even being taken on board. Now, that's a very, very serious problem to happen in any election commission and a regulatory body like that. So we've seen how public trust slowly has eroded in the institution. Also, the voter turnout figures, there were huge discrepancies in that. And in the 2024 elections, again, we saw that the voter turnout figure, the Election Commission just stopped giving the absolute number of voter turnout. Now, that's absolutely absurd to not give out numbers of people who went to vote. Everybody has a right to know in a democracy how many people went out and voted. Now, the Election Commission has those numbers. In fact, under the rules, under the Representation of People's Act, it's very clear that Form 17C has to be filled by every presiding officer in the country at the polling station level, and they are supposed to send those Form 17Cs to the returning officer on the same night as the polling gets over. This Form 17C, Part 1, basically has a detail of how many people went to vote at a polling station, how many people finally voted, and whether that matched with the EVM votes that were cast. This is very important information, and this is information that all the returning officers in the country have, and therefore the Election Commission has. Now, why the Election Commission was not giving absolute numbers became a big problem, and a lot of people asked for that information, and it was denied to them. I myself asked in May 2024 for a copy of Form 17C Part 1, and I have not got that information till date. In January 2025, I still don't have Form 17C. So there have been questions about the Election Commission that when there are these serious increases in voter turnout that are happening, which are unprecedented, then what is the role of the Election Commission? Now, in such a situation, what was required was that the Election Commission, as the election watchdog, should have come out and put all the information, all the records in the public domain and come clean. They should have basically said that we have nothing to hide. If there are questions about voter turnout, here are Form 17Cs across the country. It's really nothing in digital India to put out that information on the websites. The Election Commission could easily do it in hardly any time. Now, instead of doing that, and instead of proactively allaying people's doubts or questions, the Election Commission has gone ahead and denied all that information. The Election Commission has worked with the central government to change the very rules under which we could ask for that information. Rule 93(2) of the Conduct of Election Rules under the Representation of Peoples Act empower people, citizens, voters to be able to take information about the election process. Now, that rule has been changed because people were asking for information, and the Punjab and Haryana High Court, it's ruled that you have to give that information under Rule 93(2). The government has changed Rule 93(2) in consultation with the Election Commission.
Yes.
Now, this raises serious questions. The election commissioner now, the chief election commissioner now, coming to a press conference and saying all is well, there is no problem, you must trust us, there is nothing to doubt, doesn't help. If there is nothing to doubt, if all is well, and indeed no electoral fraud is happening, then what is required is that the chief election commissioner should have come to the press conference with all the data and put it in front of people and said, here is the data, and please you examine it and convince yourselves. That's the only way to do it. But just coming and in a very poetic way with shero shairi to say that all is well, it doesn't work. Not in a democracy. I mean, we are not in a feudal setup.
Right. But Anjali, how hopeful are you? Because in 2024, the Apex Court had declined to put on hold the 2 election commissioners' appointment under the Chief Election Commissioners Act. And it had dismissed all the applications which were seeking stay on the appointment, saying that, elections are around the corner and the stay on the appointment will result in chaos and uncertainty. Now, with that attitude, are you really hopeful that Supreme Court can really come up with a stern action as what you're looking for?
Neelu, I think that we are talking about 2 different and very distinct timings. At the time that you are talking about was really just very, very close to just before the elections took place in India, the general elections. And that was because the central government brought a law very close to the elections and appointed the election commissioners that way. And when the appointment of the election commissioners was challenged, I think the elections had already been announced. So the election commissioners' appointment being challenged, this particular law that the central government had got to change the selection committee, there was a demand for a stay on that. The Supreme Court at that time, looking at the fact that we were going into elections, basically said that if we, at this moment, hear the matter of the challenge of the election commissioner's appointment and grant a stay on this law, it will cause chaos in the country in the electoral process. Now, that was a very special or a specific moment in time. At this moment, there is no general election that is likely to happen. We've already gone through a set of state elections. The election commissioner, the chief election commissioner, is due to retire. So I think that this is a very different time, and I would really hope that, and I am very, very hopeful that the Supreme Court will not adopt the same kind of attitude that it did at that time, because the time was very different, simply because at this time we don't have any such urgency about elections coming or any such thing. And therefore, it would be perfectly logical to expect that the Supreme Court will hear this matter and do it expeditiously and do it in a manner that they are able to pronounce a judgment before the next chief comes in and is appointed. It's also very important, Neelu, because when somebody occupies a position like that, like the Chief Election Commissioner, it's very important that there be no issues of doubt around their appointment, because you see, in a democracy, public trust is everything. If citizens, if voters lose public trust in the election process, what good are those elections? If you and I and voters across the country go and vote and are not sure whether the election results will come out as per the voting pattern, the voting that has happened, and are not sure that there are unbiased and free and fair elections that are happening, what's the point of those elections? So I think that it's very important that the referee in our elections, the Election Commission of India, the election commissioners are appointed in an unbiased manner, are appointed in an independent and are allowed to function independently, are not even seen to be pliant, and are they have the trust of the people. And for that, the Supreme Court will have to rise to the occasion, and I am very hopeful that they will, because we've seen many cases in which they have.
Absolutely. And so, one last question before I wind up. So, what is exactly that one thing which you are looking from the Supreme Court? I'm not saying that there could be a middle ground or they would dilute the law, but what is that one thing which will satisfy the petitioners, which will satisfy as far as the electoral democracy is concerned? What should the Supreme Court immediately do?
I think what is very clear is that nobody is saying that it should only be the Chief Justice who should be on the selection committee or X or Y. What is in question here is that the selection committee should not have a majority of any one political party. It should not have a majority of members from the ruling party. And that is really the one thing that I think the Supreme Court also really emphasized in the Anup Baranwal case. And we hope it will uphold its own judgment. Because if there is one thing that has to be done, we are not saying bring back the Chief Justice or any such thing into the selection committee. That's all right. But as long as the law that is brought in basically makes sure that this selection committee does not have a majority of members, a preponderance of any one political party, the ruling party.
You are saying that we are not saying that bring back the Chief Justice, but most of the people are from the ruling party. In fact, all of them are from the ruling party. So if Supreme Court gives an order reconstituting the selection panel, so it could include Chief Justice, or it could include somebody from some other party. What is it exactly that you're looking at?
So, Neelu, this is not a new phenomenon. If you remember, during the Lokpal, when there were drafts of the bill that were brought up, and finally the bill that was passed, the Lokpal was also supposed to be set up by a 5-member body, which would not have a preponderance, a majority of the ruling party. And there was a composition that was brought in. There was the Prime Minister, there was the leader of opposition, there was a representative of the Chief Justice of India, and there was a cabinet minister, and then the 4 of them would together select or ask an eminent jurist to join. So the 5 people who were on the selection committee were not people who were having, there was a majority of any one party in that sense, in that selection committee. It was a balanced selection committee. So that's what is perfectly possible. And what the court needs to basically look at and examine in this is that the issue of the composition of the selection committee being very biased towards the ruling party. So what the court has to essentially, in this case, what we hope the court will say is that you cannot by law bring a selection committee which has a majority of people from the ruling party or any one party, and that composition can be worked out. It can be a representative of the Chief Justice of India. It can be a 3-member committee. It doesn't have to be the Chief Justice. It can be any other judge. It can be a retired judge who the Chief Justice nominates, or anything. Any other thing is possible, so long as we are not seeing a composition which is the kind of composition which the law has currently brought in, which is essentially saying that 2:1, the government has it, the ruling party has it. And let me also say, Nilu, that there's a very dangerous clause in the law, another very dangerous clause. It basically says that even if one member of the selection committee is absent, the appointment can still go through. This is so dangerous, which means that the meeting of the selection committee can be held at a time when the leader of opposition is also not there. So it's basically just the prime minister and one of his ministers who sit together and appoint the election commissioner. I mean, this is a joke that is being played on the democracy, on our democracy. And you see, this is not something which is unthinkable. I will give you a parallel. Under the Right to Information Act, when the information commissioners are appointed, they are supposed to be appointed by the leader of opposition and the prime minister and one of the union cabinet ministers. The last time the appointments happened, the leader of opposition was not present in the meeting, because he was called. He said, I'm out of town. The meeting we shifted. The meeting was not shifted. So basically, the prime minister and his minister sat and appointed the information commissioner. Now, tomorrow, if the same thing happens, and the election commissioner is appointed, I mean, what are we thinking? Basically, are we saying that now the BJP headquarters, we can have a meeting of the BJP and, an election commissioner can be appointed to take care of elections in an unbiased manner? I mean, this is reducing elections to a joke, and that should not happen. And I really very sincerely hope that the Supreme Court will give this case adequate attention and time, will not allow it to languish. We've seen how many important cases in the past, like the electoral bonds case, had languished in the Supreme Court for more than 7 years before a judgment came. It was a good judgment.
Do you see the possibility that, supposing if the hearing takes time, from 4th to 18th February is the date when Rajiv Kumar retires, so could the court say that Rajiv Kumar can continue till the time the hearing is not over, and once the hearing is over, then only the new chief election commissioner should be appointed? Something like that also could happen?
Look, what the court decides in its wisdom is very difficult to guess. But yes, I mean, I would say that there is enough time. If on the 4th of February, the court actually, decides to do a serious hearing, they have enough time before the 18th of February to be able to pass a judgment and make it binding on the government to ensure that the selection committee is of a proper nature. Of course, if the hearing is still ongoing, the right thing that should happen is that the appointment of a new commissioner should not happen till the hearing is over and a judgment is passed. Although I have to say that unfortunately, the last time, even in the Anup Baranwal case, even while the hearing was happening, there was great alacrity with which the ruling party acted and appointed election commissioners even before the court could give its judgment. And the court actually mentioned that. They took note of it and expressed unhappiness about it. But there is enough time. I would say that, if the court wants to, they can very easily make sure that before the retirement of Mr. Rajiv Kumar, they pass a judgment and they ask the government to make sure that the selection happens and the appointment happens as per their directions.
Thank you so much, Anjali, for joining on The Federal. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching this interview: subscribe to our channel, send us your feedback, and stay tuned to The Federal.